So we throw around the word fascism a lot. By the way, welcome back to the second hour of the program. We throw around the word fascism a lot, and I'm not sure most Americans have any kind of a genuine understanding of what that word actually means. And I can tell you for a fact that the War Department in 1943, our defense, what we call the Defense Department now, fully understood what fascism was because they were fighting Hitler in Europe. They were fighting Mussolini in Europe. They were fighting Franco in Europe. They were fighting fascists in Europe, and in the Pacific, they were fighting fascist Japanese. And those movements in Japan, it had to do with emperor worship and racism. In Europe, it had to do with Führer worship and racism. But they had a whole lot of stuff in common. So I said in 1943, they started these pamphlets in 43, but the one that Heather Cox Richardson pointed out in her brilliant Substack newsletter, it's heathercoxrichardson.substack.com, yesterday, or I guess it was this morning, it's dated yesterday, May 29th, was published on March 24th, 1945. So this was the height of World War II. And I'm just going to read to you from this brochure. This was published by the American War Department, the U.S. Department of Defense, what we call today. You're away from home, separated from your families, no longer at a civilian job or at a school, and many of you are risking your very lives. Keep in mind, this went out to the soldiers, because of a thing called fascism. But what is fascism? Fascism is not the easiest thing to analyze or identify, nor, once in power, is it easy to destroy. It's important for our future and that of the world that as many of us as possible understand the causes and practices of fascism in order to combat it. Fascism is government by the few and for the few. The objective is seizure and control of the economic, political, social, and cultural life of the state. I thought that, end of quote from the federal government. Cultural life, fascism? Yes. Let me continue. I'm reading from a War Department memo, March 24th, 1945. The basic principles of democracy stand in the way of their desires. Hence, democracy must go. Anyone who is not a member of their inner gang has to do what he's told. They permit no civil liberties, no equality before the law. Children, kitchen, and the church was the Nazi slogan for women. Heather Cox Richardson adds, they permit no civil liberties, no equality. Oh no, this is actually from it. Fascism treats women as mere breeders. Children, kitchen, and the church was the Nazi slogan for women. Fascists make their own rules. Again, I'm reading from the War Department. Fascists make their own rules and change them when they choose. They maintain themselves in power by use of force combined with propaganda based on primitive ideas of blood and race, by skillful manipulation of fear and hate, and by false promise of security. The propaganda glorifies war and insists it is smart and realistic to be pitiless and violent. Fascists understand that the fundamental principle of democracy, faith in the common sense of the common people, was the direct opposite of the fascist principle of rule by the elite few. So they fought democracy. They played political, religious, social, and economic groups against each other and seized power while these groups struggled. They go on to point out that we should not be fooled into thinking that we're safe from fascism here in the United States. Again, from the War Department brochure. We once laughed Hitler off as a harmless little clown with a funny mustache. And indeed, the U.S. has experienced sorry instances of mob sadism, lynchings, vigilantism, terror, and suppression of civil liberties. We have our hooded gangs, black legions, silver shirts, and racial and religious bigots. All of them, in the name of Americanism, have used undemocratic methods and doctrines which can be properly identified as fascist, writes the U.S. War Department in 1945. They will try to gain power under the guise of super patriotism and super Americanism. Interesting. The fascists would seize power in America by claiming that they wanted to make America great again. It goes on to say that first they would pit groups against each other. It's part of a, quote, well-planned hate campaign against minority races, religions, and other groups. Second, they'd say we don't need to involve ourselves with the rest of the world. Quote, in place of international cooperation, the fascists seek to substitute a perverted sort of ultranationalism, which tells their people that they are the only people in the world who count. With this goes hatred and suspicion toward the people of all other nations. And then third, fascists insist, quote, the world has but two choices, either fascism or communism, and they label as communists everyone who refuses to support them. Again, this was written by the War Department in 1945, and it's like they're describing today's Republican Party. It is vitally important to learn how to spot fascists, the government wrote. Quote, even though they adopt names and slogans with popular appeal, they drape themselves with the American flag. They attempt to carry out their program in the name of democracy, of the democracy that they are trying to destroy. So how do we fight fascism in the United States? Well, the War Department says the only way is by making our democracy work and by actively cooperating to preserve world peace and security. We must, they say, defy fascism. They say that by dividing people, it weakens democracy. By getting men to hate rather than think, it prevents them from seeking the real cause and the democratic solution to the problem. Amazing. Our government needs to be talking about fascism again. I mean, not just going after the fascists like the Department of Justice is doing, going after the January 6 people. I mean, this is just the smallest tip of the iceberg. And we need to be going after the leadership as well.